My friends told me that I'm way out of his league, so I made this mistake, but then months later,
I dumped my boyfriend thinking I was out of his league, and after I regretted it, he turned me down. It all started with my friends, as most things do. We were sitting around my kitchen table one night, half a bottle of wine down each, and the conversation turned to men as it always does. They asked me how things were going with him, and I hesitated. It wasn't that things were bad exactly, but they weren't great either. We'd been together for over 2 years at that point, and we had our routines. Comfortable, but maybe too comfortable, if you know what I mean. "He's nice and all," I said, shrugging, "but sometimes it feels like we're more like roommates than anything else. You know that moment when everyone looks at each other and you realize they've all been talking about you behind your back? Yeah, that was this." "Girl," one of my friends said, letting out a deep sigh, "you could do so much better. He's not even in your league." Now, I'm not usually one to buy into the whole out of his league nonsense, but they started piling on, reminding me about how I have a good job, how I'm doing well for myself, how I could be with someone who made me feel appreciated every single day. The way they framed it, staying with him started sounding like I was selling myself short. "I mean, seriously," my other friend jumped in. "You went through all of that drama with your ex and still came out of it stronger. You are smart, beautiful, and funny. Then there's him. He's just there." To be fair, they weren't wrong. My ex-boyfriend, for all intents and purposes, was a disaster. We were together for years and actually engaged. He decided he wasn't ready to get married because he was still figuring out who he was. He wasn't ready, I wasn't ready, and it showed. So, when things fell apart between us, it wasn't exactly a surprise. I guess he sort of held me back in a way. After I left university, I started neglecting my career since my ex used to pay for absolutely everything, and I didn't really have to work. After we broke up, I went back to school, got a master's, and eventually landed a good job. Then 2 years ago, I met him, my boyfriend. We met at a mutual friends party, one of those random things where you go expecting to leave early but end up staying because somehow you actually have a good time. He was there with a group of his friends, and we got talking. At first, I didn't think much of it. He seemed nice enough, but I wasn't in the mindset to get into anything serious. But one thing led to another, and before I knew it, we were spending more and more time together. He wasn't flashy or particularly ambitious, but he was steady, reliable. I felt like I could trust him. In the beginning, things were great. He was sweet, thoughtful, and he never made me feel bad about myself. We moved in together after a year of dating, and it just felt comfortable, maybe too comfortable now that I look back on it. The thing is, as time went on, that spark I felt in the beginning started to fade. He was still a good guy, he didn't do anything wrong, but something felt off, like I was settling, and my friends, as much as they might have had their own lives to worry about, were always quick to remind me of it. "You don't have to stay with someone just because they're nice," one of them said, swirling the last bit of wine in her glass. "You deserve someone who lights a fire under you." That's how the seed was planted. They convinced me that I was better off without him, that I needed to find someone who matched my energy, my drive. They made it sound like staying with him was holding me back, so I did what they suggested. I left. It wasn't dramatic or anything. I sat him down one night and told him how I felt. I said I thought we had grown apart, that we wanted different things, that I wasn't happy. He didn't fight me on it, which only made me feel like I was doing the right thing. If he'd put up more of a fight, maybe I would have reconsidered. But instead, he just nodded, like he knew this was coming, and that was it. For the first few months, I felt good about my decision. I went out more, started paying more attention to myself. I threw myself into work, my friendships, and being the best version of me. My friends kept telling me how proud they were that I finally put myself first. But now, months later, things feel different. I guess I thought leaving would make me feel more free, like I could finally go out and find someone who checked all the boxes. But the more time passes, the more I realize that maybe he wasn't the problem. Maybe I was expecting too much. Or maybe, just maybe, I was listening to everyone else's opinions instead of my own. I reached out to him recently, thinking maybe we could patch things up. It wasn't like I expected to get back together right away or anything, but I thought we could at least talk. But when I called, he didn't seem interested. He was polite, sure, but distant, like he'd already moved on while I was still stuck in the same place. And I was left wondering, did I make a huge mistake? After that phone call, everything started to feel a little too real. I had walked away thinking that I was in control, that I was making some big decision for my future. But now, all of a sudden, the control I thought I had was gone. He wasn't chasing after me. He wasn't calling to check in, to see if I was okay. He wasn't doing anything, and that messed with my head more than I expected. For the first few weeks after we broke up, I didn't even think about it. I mean, why would I? I was the one who left, right? I had made the choice and I felt confident about it. But slowly, the confidence started to fade. Every time I scrolled through social media or hung out with friends, there'd be little moments that reminded me of him. Things we used to do together, places we used to go, even songs we'd listened to on repeat. It's crazy how much you start noticing those things when you're not trying to. But what hit me the hardest wasn't the memories or the reminders. It was the silence. You'd think that when you leave someone, there's this big dramatic fallout, this war for power or attention. But in my case, there was none of that. He just let me go. No questions, no drama, nothing. And as time went on, I started questioning if that meant I didn't matter as much to him as I thought. Or maybe he was better off without me, which wasn't a thought I was prepared to deal with. I tried talking to my friends about it, of course. The same friends who had told me to leave him in the first place. At first, they were all, "You're so much better off. Just wait until you meet someone new." But when I kept bringing him up, kept asking if maybe I'd made a mistake, their responses started to shift. "You know, sometimes you just miss the routine," one friend said, trying to be supportive. "It's not really him you miss. It's the comfort of being in a relationship." That sounded logical, and I tried to believe it. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just about the routine. It was about him. I missed his stupid laugh, the way he would crack jokes when I was stressed, the way he never made me feel like I was asking too much, even when I was. The guy wasn't perfect, but he was solid. And now it felt like I was realizing all of that way too late. In the midst of all this, I did what any sane person would do when they're feeling lost. I jumped into the dating pool. My friends hyped me up, saying that the best way to get over someone is to meet new people, have some fun, and explore. So I downloaded a couple of dating apps and tried to throw myself back out there. Let me tell you, dating after being in a long-term relationship is a special kind of nightmare. Suddenly, I was swiping through profiles of guys who couldn't string together a proper sentence, let alone hold a conversation. The few dates I went on were awkward at best and downright embarrassing at worst. One guy spent the entire time talking about his crypto investments. Another one ghosted me halfway through the first drink. I wasn't looking for anything serious, but I wasn't prepared for how soul-sucking the whole process would feel. Every bad date just reminded me of what I had given up. I found myself comparing them to him, how he used to listen to me, how he'd actually make an effort. It's like the more I dated, the more I realized how rare that kind of connection actually was. Then came the regret, the terrible feeling that I had messed up something good because I let other people's opinions cloud my judgment. I kept replaying that conversation with my friends over and over in my head. What if I had never let them get in my head like that? What if I had focused on the good things in our relationship instead of nitpicking the things that weren't perfect? And the more I thought about it, the more I started to get angry at myself, at my friends, and at the whole situation. I had listened to everyone except the one person who actually mattered in all of this, me. I had let other people's opinions make me doubt something that had been working just fine. Sure, maybe we weren't setting the world on fire with passion, but we were happy, or at least I thought we were. That's when I started considering whether or not I should reach out to him again. But the more I thought about it, the more anxious I became. What if he'd moved on? What if he wasn't interested in hearing from me at all? After all, I was the one who left. I was the one who decided that he wasn't enough. And the last thing I wanted was to come off as desperate, or like I was only reaching out because I was lonely. Still, the idea kept nagging at me. I'd look at my phone a dozen times a day, debating whether or not to text him, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I was too scared of what his response might be, or worse, that there wouldn't be a response at all. So I tried to focus on other things. I threw myself into work and did my best to move forward. But no matter what I did, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had walked away from something that mattered, something that I might never get back. One night, after yet another awkward date that ended with me politely excusing myself to get some air, I found myself standing outside my apartment building, phone in hand, staring at his name in my contacts. I hadn't spoken to him since that one polite, distant phone call, but something inside me snapped. I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't keep pretending that I was fine, that I didn't care, that this was all just a bump in the road. I typed out a text. It was short, simple. Just a, "Hey, how've you been?" Nothing dramatic, nothing desperate, just an olive branch. But then, just as I was about to hit send, my phone buzzed. It wasn't him. It was one of my friends. I stared at the message from my friend for a while, my thumb hovering over the send button on the text I had written to him. It felt like some kind of twisted metaphor, like the universe was throwing one last obstacle in my way, asking if I was really sure about what I was doing. The message from my friend wasn't anything big, just a random meme and a "how are you?" But it was enough to pull me out of the moment, enough to make me pause and rethink everything. I put my phone down on the kitchen counter and walked away, needing some space to breathe and clear my head. I'd spent so much time wrapped up in my feelings of regret and uncertainty, replaying every moment of our relationship and breakup like it was some kind of unsolvable puzzle. But what was I really doing here? I thought back to why I left in the first place. The doubts, the nagging feeling that something was missing. It hadn't all been in my head. There were real reasons I walked away, reasons that had nothing to do with what my friend said, and everything to do with me feeling like I wasn't being fulfilled. The problem was, I didn't know if those reasons were still valid, or if I was just looking at everything through the distorted lens of loneliness and nostalgia. That night, I laid in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about him and the life I had walked away from. Was I missing him, or was I just missing the idea of him, the comfort, the familiarity? Did I actually want to try again, or was I just scared of the unknown? As the hours dragged on, I realized that I had been putting off the one thing I needed to do, face the truth, whatever that was. I couldn't keep living in this limbo, caught between what was and what could have been. I needed to decide, once and for all, whether I was going to move forward with my life, or whether I was going to try and fix what I had broken. The next morning, I picked up my phone and reread the text I had written to him. It seemed small and silly now, just a vague. We hadn't gone through something major together. I deleted it. Do it right. So I called him. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. I almost hung up. But just as I was about to, he answered. "Hello?" His voice sounded the same as it always had, and for a second I was thrown back to all the times we had talked late into the night, when everything between us had been easy and uncomplicated. But I wasn't calling for nostalgia. "Hey," I said, my voice catching a little. "It's me." There was a pause on the other end. "Hey," he said after what felt like an eternity. "How are you?" I'm okay," I said. "I've been thinking about you, about us, and I wanted to talk." Another pause, longer this time. I could practically hear the gears turning in his head, trying to figure out what this was about. "I've been thinking too," he finally said, his voice careful. "But I don't know if talking is going to change anything." The pit in my stomach grew. I hadn't been expecting him to jump at the chance to get back together, but hearing the hesitation in his voice, hearing that distance hurt more than I thought it would. "I know I left," I said, rushing to get the words out before I lost my nerve. "I know I said things weren't working, but I've been thinking a lot about everything, and I miss you." There it was, the truth laid bare. I had missed him, missed us. And now, standing at the edge of this moment, I was trying to figure out if there was any way to fix it. But he didn't respond right away, and when he did, his voice was quiet. "I miss you too," he said. "But I don't know if that's enough anymore." My heart sank. I hadn't expected this to be easy, but hearing him say that still felt like a punch to the gut. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I mean, you left," he said, his words coming out slowly, like he was choosing them carefully. "And I get why. I wasn't everything you needed. I know that. But I've had time to think too, and I don't know if going back would be the right thing for either of us." I sat down, the weight of his words hitting me hard. I had been so focused on my own feelings, my own regret and second guessing, that I hadn't even considered what this had done to him. I had walked away, left him to pick up the pieces of whatever we had, and now I was asking if he could just put them back together. "I thought maybe we could try again," I said, my voice small. "I know I messed up, but—" "I'm not saying it's impossible," he cut in. "But I'm different now. This time apart, it made me realize things too. About myself, about what I want, and I don't know if I want to go back to what we had." Silence hung in the air between us, heavy and uncomfortable. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to fight for him, to beg him to give us another shot. But another part of me, the part that had been questioning everything, wondered if maybe he was right. Maybe we weren't supposed to go back. "I don't want to hurt you," he said, breaking the silence. "But I think we both need to be honest with ourselves. Maybe we're not the same people we were when we started all this." I felt tears welling up in my eyes, but I blinked them away. He was right, and I hated myself for that. Update. Hey everyone. I figured I'd give an update since a lot has happened since I last posted. After that phone call with him, I was pretty torn up for a while. His words stuck with me. Maybe we're not the same people we were when we started all this. At first, it felt like he was closing the door on everything, and I didn't know how to process that. I had spent so long regretting my decision to leave, and to hear him say that he wasn't sure if going back was even an option, it messed me up. But over the next few weeks, I started to realize that he was right. I had changed. He had changed, and it wasn't fair to either of us to try and force things back to how they used to be, just because I was feeling lonely or nostalgic. I needed to figure out who I was outside of our relationship and whether or not I was really ready to be with him, or anyone for that matter, again. I still considered breaking up with him a mistake because we could have worked it out together and not just accept we were different. I made the wrong decision, but came to terms with it. It was time to get over and accept that we wouldn't go back together. So I took a step back. I stopped reaching out to him, stopped trying to fix things that maybe weren't meant to be fixed. It wasn't easy, though. There were days when all I wanted to do was text him or call him, just to hear his voice or feel like we were still connected in some way. But every time I resisted the urge, I felt a little bit stronger, a little bit more like myself. During this time, I focused on my job. I started spending more time doing things for me, things I had neglected while I was caught up in the relationship and all the fallout from the breakup. I took up running again, which used to be my go-to for clearing my head before life got busy. I signed up for a yoga class. I know, so cliche, but it really did help. And most importantly, I started going to therapy. Therapy has been a game changer for me. I hadn't realized how much I had been carrying old baggage from my relationship with my first ex, from my breakup with my boyfriend, and even from my childhood. Unpacking all of that has been hard, but it's also been freeing. It made me realize that a lot of my feelings of regret weren't just about losing him. They were about losing the version of myself that I had been when we were together. I had been holding on to this idea of what my life should look like instead of accepting what it actually was. A few months passed, and in that time, I started to feel more at peace with everything. I wasn't obsessing over him anymore. I wasn't beating myself up over my choices. I was just living my life, and honestly, it felt good. Then out of the blue, he reached out to me. It wasn't anything dramatic, just a simple text asking how I was doing, but it caught me off guard. I hadn't expected to hear from him again, and part of me wasn't sure how to respond. After all the work I had been doing on myself, was I ready to let him back in? Was this a step backward, or was it an opportunity to reconnect, maybe on different terms? I sat on the text for a while, unsure of what to say, but eventually I responded. We exchanged a few messages, catching up on what we'd been up to. It was nice, but it also felt different. There was no urgency, no expectation of anything more. It was just two people who had shared something important, checking in on each other. A couple of days later, he asked if I wanted to grab coffee. I was hesitant at first. I didn't want to undo all the progress I had made by rushing back into something that wasn't right for me. But at the same time, I felt like I owed it to myself to see where things stood between us. So I agreed. We met up at a little cafe not far from where we used to live together. Walking in, I was nervous, unsure of what to expect. But when I saw him sitting there sipping his coffee, something shifted. He looked the same, but also different, calmer, more grounded, like he had done some growing of his own during our time apart. The conversation was easy, comfortable even. We talked about work, life, our friends. We laughed about some of the stupid things we used to do when we were together. But we didn't talk about us, not right away at least. It was like we were both feeling things out, trying to see if there was anything left between us. Eventually, though, the topic came up. He asked me how I was really doing and if I was happy. And for the first time in a long time, I could honestly say that I was. I told him about the work I'd been doing on myself, how I'd come to terms with a lot of the things that had been weighing me down. He listened, really listened, and it felt good to be heard. Then he shared his side. He told me how hard the breakup had been for him at first, how he had questioned everything, wondering if he had done something wrong, or if he could have fought harder to keep me. But over time, he realized that he needed the space too, that he had been in a rut, just coasting along, not really thinking about what he wanted or where he was going. The breakup had forced him to look at his life in a way he hadn't before. By the end of the conversation, we both agreed on one thing. We weren't the same people we were when we were together, and that was okay. In fact, it was probably a good thing. He told me he had a new girlfriend. Listening to that hurted me a lot, but it was a natural process I had to accept. I wanted to cry when he said it, but I kept my cool as much as I could. So, where does that leave us now? Honestly, I don't know. I don't know if we can be friends, because I know I still have feelings for him. It's hard seeing someone you love so much moving on with their life without you. I guess I have to do the same. I've learned that I need to prioritize myself and my own happiness before I can be with anyone else. And I think he's on the same page. Maybe we'll find our way back to each other, or maybe we won't. Either way, I'm okay with it. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm in control of my own story. And that's something I wouldn't trade for anything. Hey Reddit, first time posting here. Though I've been lurking on this subreddit for a while, I never thought I'd actually be writing something myself. This is honestly my favorite subreddit. There's something about the stories and advice here that just keeps me coming back. I guess it's because I always felt like I could relate. Until now, because this situation is way beyond what I ever imagined I'd be going through. So here it goes. My name is Anna, I'm 32, and my husband's name is David, he's 31. We've been married for about 4 years now, but we've known each other since college. I'll admit, it was pretty much love at first sight for both of us back then. David swept me off my feet, and in the beginning, everything was just perfect. He was romantic in all the ways you dream about. You know, the kind of guy who plans surprise date nights, weekend getaways, and remembers every little detail no matter how busy he was. He made me feel special in ways I didn't even know I needed. David's always been the provider in our relationship. He has a high-pressure, high-paying job, and he worked his way up to a pretty important position over the years. With that came a lot of responsibility and long hours, but even with all that, he always tried his best to be there for me. Physically, emotionally, everything. It wasn't easy for him, but he made sure I never felt neglected. Meanwhile, I worked too, but I won't lie, my job was super low demand. It didn't pay very well, but honestly, that was never a big deal because David took care of all the finances. I never had to worry about money or bills, he handled everything. So while I technically had a job, it kind of felt like I was a semi-stay-at-home wife. I had a lot of free time to do whatever I wanted, and I guess that's where things started to go downhill. With David always working so hard, our dynamic shifted. I didn't realize it at first because he was still trying his best to keep our marriage exciting, but I guess I started feeling lonely. I had all this time on my hands, and David's job was becoming more and more demanding. We went from spending tons of time together to seeing each other mostly in passing. Looking back now, I can see how that emptiness crept in, how I started craving attention in ways I never thought I would. I always felt guilty for thinking like that, but it's like I couldn't stop myself. David was providing everything I needed, but I guess I wanted more, and that's when I started doing things I shouldn't have. I don't know exactly when I fell out of love with David. It wasn't like a switch flipped overnight. I think it happened gradually, so slowly that I barely even noticed it myself. Maybe it was when I started to feel the weight of his absence more than his presence. There were moments when I would sit in our house and it would just feel so empty, like a hollow space where our love used to be. And I know that sounds cliche, but that's really how it felt. David poured himself into his career, and I can't blame him for that. He worked so hard to provide for us, to make sure we had everything we needed. But somewhere along the way, it became like he was always working. He was constantly on calls, glued to his laptop, or off at some meeting. When he was home, he was exhausted, and while he always made the effort, it wasn't the same anymore. It was like his attention was split between me and everything else going on in his world. At first, I tried to brush it off. He was busy, I got that. He was trying his best to be there for me in the ways he could, but I guess his best just wasn't enough for me anymore. I felt this growing sense of isolation. Even when we were together, it was like we were living in different worlds. I would try to talk to him about my day, and he'd listen, but his eyes were distant. His mind was somewhere else, probably thinking about the next big project at work, or the next deadline looming over his head. It got to the point where I would find myself longing for something different, not just attention, though I think that's a part of it, but that sense of freedom we had back in college. Those were the days when we had no real responsibilities, when we could be spontaneous and carefree. We had all the time in the world for each other back then. We'd go out with friends, stay up all night talking, dreaming about the future. Everything felt possible, and life was exciting. But now it felt like our life was all about routines and obligations. There was no excitement, no thrill, no spontaneity. David and I had settled into this comfortable but monotonous life, and I hated it. I craved that feeling of being swept off my feet again. And even though I know David still loved me, still tried so hard to make me happy, it just wasn't enough anymore. I started to wonder if I even wanted this life, this marriage. I didn't know how to tell him any of this. How could I explain that, despite everything he was doing for me, I still felt alone? How do you tell someone who's giving their all that it's not what you need anymore? So instead of talking to him, I kept everything bottled up, pretending things were fine when they weren't. It wasn't long before I started looking for distractions, for something to fill the void. At first, I told myself it was harmless. I'd hang out with friends more, go out for drinks, or catch up with people from work. But then, slowly, I started looking elsewhere for that excitement, that connection. It wasn't intentional. It never is, I guess. But before I knew it, I was stepping into dangerous territory. I was doing things I never thought I'd do, and it made me feel alive again in a way that my marriage hadn't in a long time. When I met Vincent, it wasn't hard for him to sweep me off my feet. In fact, I think I was waiting for someone like him to come along. I craved excitement, spontaneity, and something to break up the monotony of my life, and Vincent was exactly the kind of person to bring that in. He was younger, in his early 20s, while I was in my early 30s. There was something about his energy, his carefree attitude, that pulled me in. He was like a breath of fresh air in a life that had started to feel stifling. At first, I convinced myself that nothing would happen between us. We were just friends, after all. It was nice to have someone to talk to, someone who wasn't burdened by the weight of responsibility like David was. Vincent was young, free, and didn't have a care in the world. He could laugh about anything, talk about dreams he hadn't yet chased, and live in the moment in a way that I hadn't been able to for years. I told myself that there was nothing wrong with enjoying his company. It wasn't like I was crossing any lines. At least that's what I kept telling myself. But looking back, I think I always knew where it was headed. The attraction was there, just hiding beneath the surface. Every time we hung out, every time we laughed together, it chipped away at the boundaries I had set for myself. I started to look forward to our meetups more than I should have, and I couldn't help but feel a little excitement every time he texted me, asking when we could see each other next. I don't know exactly when things escalated into something more. I guess it wasn't a single moment, but rather a series of small steps that led us to cross the line. A lingering touch here, a flirty comment there, and suddenly we were no longer just friends. I remember the first time I realized that I was in deep, that this wasn't just harmless fun anymore. It was after one of our casual coffee meetups. He leaned in to hug me goodbye, and for a split second, neither of us pulled away. There was an unspoken understanding between us, and from that point on, there was no going back. Vincent fell for me quickly. I guess I represented something different for him too, an older woman with more experience, someone who had lived life a little more than the girls his age. I think my financial stability also played a part. I wasn't dependent on anyone, and to him, that was probably exciting. I could pay for things, take him to nicer places, and show him a lifestyle that was beyond what he was used to. He saw me as this mysterious, confident woman, and that made him fall for me even harder. Before I knew it, we were having an affair. It started slowly, a stolen kiss here, a secret meeting there, but it didn't take long for things to spiral out of control. The excitement of sneaking around, of doing something forbidden, was intoxicating. It made me feel alive again in a way I hadn't felt in years. With Vincent, I could forget about the boring routines of my life with David. I didn't have to think about the bills or the responsibilities or the future. I could just be in the moment, reckless and free, just like when I was younger. But there was a darker side to all of this too. As much as I enjoyed my time with Vincent, I couldn't shake the guilt. Every time I went back home to David, it was like a weight settled on my chest. He had no idea what I was doing behind his back. He was still working hard, still trying to keep our marriage alive, while I was slipping further and further away. I could see the love in his eyes whenever he looked at me, and it made me sick to my stomach because I knew I didn't deserve it. I tried to justify it to myself, telling myself that I needed this, that David wasn't giving me what I wanted anymore. But deep down, I knew that wasn't entirely true. David hadn't changed. He was still the same man I fell in love with. The problem was me. I was the one who had changed, who had gotten bored, who had let my selfish desires take over. And now, I was in too deep with Vincent to just walk away. I kept telling myself that I could keep the two worlds separate, that I could have my affair with Vincent without it affecting my marriage. But the truth is, you can't keep secrets like that forever. And I think, on some level, I knew that too. As my affair with Vincent continued, my marriage with David deteriorated even more. To be honest, it had already been suffering for a while. David was always the one who did all the work to keep our relationship afloat. He was the one who planned the romantic dinners, the weekend getaways, the little surprises that kept the spark alive. I, on the other hand, had grown too accustomed to him doing everything. It wasn't that I didn't care at all, I just didn't know how to pick up the slack when I saw our relationship faltering. I didn't know how to plan romantic dates or make things exciting anymore. So when David got busier with work, our marriage naturally became a bit stale. Then came Vincent, and everything got worse. With Vincent in the picture, I had even less emotional energy to give to David. It was like all the love and affection I had left was being funneled into this secret relationship. The excitement of being with someone new, someone who made me feel alive again, overshadowed everything else. I stopped caring about David's needs because as long as he paid the bills and took care of everything, I didn't have a single worry. My focus shifted entirely to my affair with Vincent. I became incredibly distant from David, both emotionally and physically. Our love life suffered immensely. David would try to initiate intimacy, but I wasn't interested anymore. It wasn't just that I was tired from work or distracted. I had completely lost the connection with him. In my mind, David became just a figure in the background of my life, a provider rather than a partner. As long as he kept things running smoothly, I had no reason to invest in our marriage anymore. I was too wrapped up in my affair to care about what was happening at home. At first, I tried to be subtle. I changed the password on my phone, something I'd never done before. I'd always been an open book with David, but now I was keeping secrets. I started spending more time glued to my phone, constantly texting Vincent, laughing at his messages, and getting excited every time my phone buzzed. David noticed, of course, but I brushed it off, telling him I was just busy with work or talking to friends. He trusted me, and I relied on that trust to keep my secret safe. But over time, I became bolder. I guess that's what happens when you get away with something for long enough. You start to think you're invincible. David was so busy with his demanding job that I convinced myself he would never notice. I became more careless, more reckless. There were times when I wouldn't even bother hiding the fact that I was messaging Vincent late at night. I'd smile at my phone, completely lost in the moment, while David sat on the other side of the room, none the wiser. Eventually, I crossed a line I never thought I would. I started bringing Vincent to the house. It seemed insane at first, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. David was always at work, and our schedules hardly overlapped. The house felt like mine, and I wanted to enjoy my time with Vincent without having to sneak around outside. So I turned off the security cameras, just in case, and invited Vincent over. It felt crazy the first time, walking him through the front door of the home I shared with my husband, but I didn't care. I was too far gone to feel guilty. Vincent and I would spend hours together in the house, laughing, talking, and even acting like a real couple. I remember one afternoon vividly. We were lying on the couch, the same couch David and I used to sit on, and Vincent told me he loved me. And without even thinking, I told him I loved him too. It came out so naturally, as if that was where my heart really belonged now. It was like I had completely compartmentalized my life with David and my affair with Vincent. When I was with Vincent, the rest of my life didn't exist. And the scariest part? David never noticed. He was so preoccupied with work that he didn't suspect a thing. He didn't ask questions when I started spending more time away from home or when I was constantly glued to my phone. He never asked about the subtle changes in my behavior, the emotional distance, the way I had almost entirely checked out of our marriage. I had become so confident that I could do whatever I wanted, and David would never catch on. Even though I was doing everything I could to live in two worlds, I guess I kind of knew that eventually something would give. I just didn't know when or how disastrous it would be. Especially since I had money to throw around, maintaining my relationship with Vincent became even easier. He was still so young, still in college, and he needed the financial support. I guess in some ways I liked that dynamic. It made me feel like I had power, like I was needed, which is something I hadn't felt with David in a long time. Vincent was eager to please, and I was more than ready to provide for him. Whenever he needed something, whether it was help with tuition, rent, or even just money for day-to-day expenses, I'd step in without hesitation. It gave me an excuse to spend more time with him and solidified the bond between us. And before I knew it, our affair had been going on for months. We were locked into a cycle where I was both his lover and his benefactor, and I enjoyed the thrill of it all. Looking back, I should have noticed something was off with David. I should have known he knew, but I was too wrapped up in my affair to think too much about it. For a while, David had been trying his best to bridge the gap between us, to reignite whatever spark we once had. He would plan little date nights again, ask me how my day was, and try to initiate conversations that weren't just about bills or groceries. He was doing everything he could to salvage our marriage, even though I wasn't meeting him halfway. But then, all of a sudden, he stopped. He stopped trying to talk to me, stopped planning dates, and stopped asking me how my day went. I noticed the change, of course, but I didn't think too much about it at the time. I just figured he had grown tired of trying, that he had finally realized there was no saving our marriage. A part of me thought he had simply accepted that we were drifting apart and that nothing was going to bring us back together, so I let it happen. I let the distance between us grow wider and wider. I didn't try to fix it because, truthfully, I didn't want to. I was so focused on Vincent and the excitement he brought into my life that I was willing to let my marriage fall apart in the background. What I didn't realize was that David wasn't just giving up. He was getting suspiciously calm. His sudden lack of interest in fixing things should have been a red flag, but I was too self-absorbed to see it. He began staying home more, working from home instead of going to the office as often as he used to. At first, I didn't think much of it, but then it started to bother me. Him being at home more meant I didn't have as much freedom to see Vincent or to bring him to the house. The walls were closing in and I began to feel trapped. I had gotten so used to sneaking around that the idea of not having the time or space to do it anymore made me paranoid and annoyed. With David home so much, I had to start getting creative. I couldn't just leave the house without an excuse, so I began to lie. I told him I was going to see a friend or my sister, or that I had errands to run. I even started saying I was going shopping when I had no intention of going anywhere near a store. Any excuse that worked, I would use. The goal was always the same: to leave the house without raising suspicion so I could either go see Vincent or spend time with him outside of the house. But the more I lied, the more I started to feel like I was walking on thin ice. David, however, never questioned me. He didn't seem interested in where I was going or what I was doing, which should have made me feel relieved, but it only made me more paranoid. His calmness unsettled me. Why wasn't he asking me questions? Why wasn't he curious about why I was leaving so often? It felt like he knew something but wasn't saying it, and that thought lingered in the back of my mind every time I walked out the door. Yet I pushed those feelings aside and convinced myself I was in control of the situation. I kept telling myself that everything would be fine, that I could keep up the charade for as long as I needed to. Well, that day began like any other, with excitement building because Vincent and I had planned to meet at his apartment. We hadn't seen each other for a few days due to his school commitments, and David being home more frequently. I was eager for the escape Vincent always brought. Just before I left, David offered me lunch he had made. I didn't think much of it. David had been surprisingly calm lately, so it didn't feel out of the ordinary. I told him I was heading to the mall for a self-care day, getting my nails done, buying skincare products. He accepted my excuse without hesitation, and I felt relieved, believing I had outsmarted him once again. I agreed to the lunch because David was a great cook, and as always, the food was delicious. But as I ate, I noticed something different. David was watching me closely. His eyes stayed on me a bit too long, but I brushed it off, thinking maybe he was just being attentive or trying to make an effort again. I didn't think twice. After lunch, I left for Vincent's place. I was ready for a relaxing afternoon with him. But as soon as I walked through his door, I felt something was wrong. A sharp rumbling in my stomach that I couldn't ignore. I chalked it up to maybe eating too fast or David adding too much seasoning, but the discomfort intensified quickly. I excused myself and made a mad dash to Vincent's bathroom. What was supposed to be a romantic rendezvous turned into a disaster. I was stuck in the bathroom, running back and forth, unable to control my stomach. I was mortified. My time with Vincent was completely ruined because I couldn't stop using the toilet. I never questioned what had happened, still thinking it was just bad food or a stomach bug. I reassured myself that I'd mention it to David later, but in that moment, all I could focus on was not embarrassing myself further in front of Vincent. Unfortunately, it was too late. I had humiliated myself beyond repair, and by the time I left, I was exhausted and embarrassed. I even had a small accident before I made it home. The driveway, everything fell apart. My belongings were piled on the porch, the door was locked, and the security code I had used for years no longer worked. My heart sank and code multiple times, but nothing worked. That's when it hit me. David had changed the code. I stood outside in disbelief, frantically trying to piece together what had happened. I grabbed my phone and called him, desperate for answers. When he confirmed that he had locked me out and told me to leave, I was frozen in shock. He knew about everything, about the affair, about Vincent, and he was done. The words stung. I was reeling, but my body still hadn't recovered from the laxatives, and I needed a bathroom more than ever. My panic grew as I realized I had nowhere to go. I gathered what I could and drove straight to Vincent's apartment, hoping he would let me stay. But when I arrived, he didn't open the door. When I finally got him to answer, he told me that he couldn't let me stay. He had a girlfriend, and I couldn't be there. It was like a punch to the gut. I hadn't known about the girlfriend, and now I was faced with yet another betrayal. But with my stomach in knots, I had no time to dwell on it. I was forced to drive to my parents' house, trying to hold myself together. When I arrived, I rushed inside and locked myself in the bathroom for the rest of the day. My parents were confused, asking questions, but I was too humiliated to explain. I sat there, overwhelmed by the sheer weight of what had happened. My affair, my marriage, my dignity, it all came crashing down in the most humiliating way possible. In a single day, I had lost everything. It's barely been a day since everything went down, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. Honestly, I don't even know why I'm posting here. I just need to vent, get some advice, and distract myself from this mess. My stomach is still in knots, not just from what I ate, but from all the shame I feel. I haven't talked to David yet because I'm so embarrassed. I can't believe I let things get this far. Every time I think about it, I feel heavier, like I'm carrying this huge weight on my shoulders. I keep replaying everything in my mind, the excitement of the affair, and now this crushing loneliness. I never thought I'd be in this position, feeling so lost and alone. My friends had no idea about my marriage problems. I could never bring myself to tell them about Vincent. I feel like I've let everyone down, including myself. I'm torn about what to do next. Should I reach out to David and apologize, even though I know it won't change anything? Or should I give it some time and hope he'll talk to me first? Just thinking about facing his hurt and disappointment makes me feel sick. Part of me wants to run away from it all, to escape the consequences of my choices. But I know I need to confront this. So here I am, posting on Reddit for the first time, hoping for some perspective or just a way to take my mind off things. I know I have to deal with this, but right now, I just need a moment to breathe. Any advice would really help. Update. Hey Reddit, wow, the comments on my last post hit hard. I've been reading through them, and some are really soul-crushing and hurtful. A lot of you judged me without knowing the whole story. I get that what I did was wrong, but I don't think anyone who hasn't been in my shoes really has the right to judge me. That said, I have a bit of an update, one that's just as crushing as the comments. I decided to reach out to David. Many of you suggested I leave him alone and just go for a divorce, saying I deserved it. I can't agree with that, but whatever. I wanted to apologize and see if there was any chance we could work things out, but he refused to talk. I wanted to meet him in person and plead my case, but he made it clear that if I showed up at his workplace or our home, he'd have security throw me out. He told me he was done with me and that he'd given me so many chances to change. He mentioned he had known about my affair for a while but felt I wouldn't own up to it. I was absolutely shocked. If he knew, why didn't he say something earlier? Why let it drag on? I feel completely crushed. How does one person lose everything so quickly? I still haven't reached out to Vincent yet, but I will, and I plan to let him know exactly how I feel. Hearing from David that Vincent sold me out makes me sick. David told me he'd reached out to Vincent and that he had even set up cameras in Vincent's apartment. He said he has embarrassing videos of me, videos from that day I went over to see Vincent, including those moments in the bathroom. I'm horrified. I can't believe Vincent would do that to me. David didn't say what he planned to do with those videos. He just said, "We'll see." That uncertainty is eating me alive. I feel so lost and confused, and to be honest, I'm just feeling sick about the whole situation. I don't know where to go from here or what to do next. Any advice would be really appreciated. Update. Hey Reddit, just a quick mini update because I reached out to Vincent again. I've been calling him non-stop, but all I got from him was that I deserved everything that happened. He claimed that I was a liar and that David didn't deserve what I was doing to him. A liar? I can't shake the feeling that David must have offered him a lot of money to turn against me. Honestly, I guess we'll see how loyal Vincent is when that money runs out. Speaking of money, I'm still at my parents' house, and I know I can't stay here forever. If I stick around too long, I'll end up having to pay rent, which is just another layer of stress. My salary is barely enough to cover my own bills, let alone rent at my parents' place. Without David, I'd be completely stranded, and I really don't want that. David still won't talk to me, and he's ignoring all my texts. I'm left in the dark about what he plans to do with those videos he mentioned. It's incredibly frustrating. I feel a mix of hurt and rage. First, he laces my food with laxatives, and now I'm left wondering what else he has in store for me. The uncertainty is driving me crazy. At this point, I'm just trying to figure out my next steps. I know I have to confront this situation head on and find a way to fix things, but every option seems bleak. I feel lost and overwhelmed, and any advice would really help right now. Update. Hello, Reddit. Honestly, I've stopped reading the comments on my last posts because I don't want to damage my mental health. I'm only posting here because it feels a bit like journaling, which I've come to appreciate during this chaotic time. It's been a couple of weeks since my last update, and a lot has happened, so I'll fill you in. First of all, I got served with divorce papers, and yes, I signed them. I'm done with David. He's shown himself to be heartless. He released those videos everywhere. I can't even begin to explain how embarrassing it is to have a video of myself in the restroom, farting, sweating, and just, having a rough time. Do you know how mortifying it is for every person I know to have seen that? It's absolutely crushing. And please don't tell me to go to the police. I can't, because I have no solid proof that David was the one who leaked them. So the divorce is official now. I can't stay with someone who would do something so cruel. Why would he betray me like this? The fallout has been severe. I lost my job because of this. Yes, you read that right. My video became the talk of the office, and I couldn't bear the humiliation of working with people who had seen me in that state. Even if I hadn't been fired, I would have quit. I can't work alongside people who have that footage on their phones. I'm currently looking for another job, but it's been tough. The job market is awful, and I suspect that some interviewers have seen those videos. It's a small town, and word travels fast. I'm even considering moving away because I can't handle the embarrassment anymore. The last thing I want is to come here and rant about my life only to get more judgment. I know some people will say I deserve this, but honestly, my life has turned upside down in ways I never imagined. Update. Hey Reddit, it's me again. Sorry for the silence lately. I've been focused on rebuilding my life, which feels like it collapsed in mere minutes, like a house of cards. In the couple of months since I last updated, I deleted the app, stepped away from Reddit, and sought free therapy to get my head straight. It's been a journey, and I want to share what's been going on. I feel like I owe you guys this one final update, even though you don't deserve it. It feels like this is the one last thing I need to do to close the chapter that is David, but I know I'll never ever close that chapter. I'll always regret it. First off, the divorce is finally finalized. Thanks, I guess? Sadly, I walked away with absolutely nothing. I was legally stranded. I expected at least a little something, but no, nada, zilch. We didn't have any premarital assets, which was a shock I discovered in the courtroom. David had bought the house with his money after we were married, and I thought that would count for something. But apparently, it didn't. I don't know what kind of strings he pulled or what trickery was at play, but he got to keep everything. I left that courthouse feeling empty, my entire life reduced to a few moments of legal jargon. After that, I plunged back into job searching, but nothing was panning out. I started hearing whispers that David might be poisoning the market against me, making it harder for me to find work. So I made the tough decision to leave town and start fresh somewhere else. It was a hard choice. There were nights I had to sleep in my car, when I felt the weight of my situation was pressing down on me, but I was determined to rebuild, and that's why I've been MIA. Thankfully, after moving to the next town over, I finally landed a job. It doesn't pay much, but it's enough to cover my bills and rent a tiny studio apartment. It's cramped, but it's mine, and I'm managing. I'm keeping my head above water, and I know I'll find my footing again. Even if David doesn't want me anymore, I'm determined to find someone who can help me get back on my feet financially. It's only a matter of time. As for the videos, you all suggested I report them to the police since they could be traced back to Vincent. I did. At first, they didn't take me seriously, but I insisted until they finally had to listen. They arrested Vincent, but to my shock, he wouldn't throw David under the bus. He claimed he didn't know about any cameras in his house, saying they must have been placed there by someone else. It was a ridiculous excuse, but for some reason the police bought it and let him go. I can only guess that David had a hand in that. So, no justice there. I'm relieved I left that town. The embarrassment is something I doubt will ever leave my mind. I think about David all the time. I miss him. It's crazy how things change so quickly. I wish I could turn back time. I feel like I've gone from a luxurious life to barely affording decent meals. I know now that I took a lot for granted, including David. I'm sorry for how everything went down. It's a hard lesson learned, and I'm still trying to figure out how to move forward.